what success felt like when I first made money. And I was at a young age, got very fortunate to buy a building and flip it very quickly, within a year. And I did that with 2 or 3 other buildings, and it was over $1 million that I made in a year. It was like a drug, honestly. Once that happened and I could actually picture and do it, it was exhilarating. And I remember the feeling. It was almost like in sports when you score a touchdown or you basically, your team wins. It was pretty exciting back, and that was back in the 80s, early 80s, just coming out of college. So it was kind of fun to have that experience at a young age. Having grown up in a family that had a family business of running a boarding home for veterans, I got the feeling of working for ourselves. And then I had a friend who got me into real estate and got me excited about it, and I basically was able to be involved and learn real estate, and I got my real estate license, and made me have a sense of, okay, I've got to get a deal done to achieve. So that instilled in me a competitive thought process of, okay, I need to figure out how to make this work. And I had that, I think, at a young age of, playing sports and being involved in activities that you had to reach a goal. And I think when all of a sudden you've got to figure out how to do that in the financial world, that's what gives you that excitement to achieve. So, and I think people either get it or they have that desire or they don't, and they're willing to put up with the stress and the pain of, having a mortgage. And if you're willing to sign a document and you're willing to personally bet and lose everything you have, if the bank decides to, foreclose or call the note, then you're willing to personally guarantee something and get behind it. In 89, 88, the market crashed in real estate, and all of a sudden I went from being, having a substantial financial statement, and all of a sudden real estate wasn't worth what it originally was. And I was back then, had a hard time paying my home mortgage, had a hard time paying for the buildings, and all of a sudden had to do whatever it took to kind of stay afloat. And I never filed bankruptcy, but I had moments where I had to communicate. And so it made me set a goal of getting out of that financial trouble and get back to being liquid again, which was tough. But markets switch, and you just have to develop ways to sustain those times. You got to make a lot more than $1 million today to sustain and be in business. I think I get asked the question, what would you change? What would you do differently? And I honestly dislike thinking about, what would I do differently or what would I tell myself, because I always like to think forward versus back. But one thing I think I would tell my younger self, if I could have that opportunity, would be make sure you got enough money to pay your taxes. Make sure you got enough money to deal with, when things get tight. So try to develop a way where you squirrel away a little funds for the unforeseen circumstances. Additionally, I would say try to make sure you communicate with people that can help you financially if you do get into some trouble there. I think I've had 2 or 3 times where I've been really up against it. Even before COVID, financially, we had run into some substantial issues because we had built our company to grow 30% a year, and we were really doing well through the early 2000s. And then all of a sudden, when I started in the beer business, there were like 3 or 4 competitors, and then all of a sudden I had 6,000 competitors. And we had to restructure our whole company just before COVID and during COVID to, because we had grown over those years with overhead, and it got really difficult to manage the overhead without the growth. And so you got to be very careful if you all of a sudden stop growing as a company and you've built your company for growth, because you have to really be willing to adjust. And people look at your, they call it sacrificial lambs, or situations where you have to cut off certain opportunities. And we had got into a few restaurants that really didn't make money. In Orlando, Florida, we had a Sea Dog, and it was right outside of Disney. And one word of advice: don't compete against Disney. You try different things, and we had a lot of early success with Federal Jacks and some of our other locations, and then we had some locations that didn't do well, and that put us in a position. But then all of a sudden we've had some other things that have done very well. And So I don't want to say it's been like a roller coaster. You never actually feel comfortable if you're an entrepreneur that's been up against it a few times, or if you started broke like I did. I didn't have the resources when we started, and one point I had 8 or 9 credit cards going and was juggling. I had perfect credit, but I was juggling these credit cards to stay afloat. And people always ask me, how does it feel to have made it? And I said, well, I'll let you know when I get there, because you always feel like something's going to drop on your head. And a buddy of mine was explaining, well, we've been through 9/11, we've been through 2 or 3 real estate crashes, we've been through, and you go through enough of these things in your career at 63, and you realize that, anything can happen, and you got to be ready for it. But you have to also have fun. You got to enjoy the journey. And even one time when I was really up against it, and I had 2 roommates living with me, and I was barely paying my mortgage, but I communicated with everybody I owed money to and explained, okay, here's what's going to happen, and this is how I'm going to get out of this situation, and this is how we're going to succeed. And most times that plan worked, and if that plan didn't work, I came up with another plan. Time goes fast when you look backwards. Time goes very slow when you've got a bill to pay, for example, or something happens to you unforeseen. One time, all of a sudden, we had a situation on a sewer bill that we actually told the city we had 2 different sewer meters, and they weren't reading one of them, and it was actually over a period of 15 years. And initially, the people that we talked to for about 6 months, everything was fine, just we're going to pay the new rate. And then all of a sudden, a couple of politicians got involved, and they went after us for $1.5 million, which all of a sudden there's no way you could pay $1.5 million. And that was about a 2 to 3 year negotiation, and then we went to binding arbitration, and that got resolved. But there was a lot of stress involved, and you realize that you can have a nice little company that may have made $1 million or may be making money, but you can have something happen that changes the circumstances dramatically. So you got to be very careful to never rest on your laurels, and try to do your best to conserve a little capital to deal with things. But I never did. I just kept going. The moment you actually have a very strong event that happens, you feel like, oh wow, you reach the top of the mountain, and you forget a lot of the tough things that happen along the way when you're climbing that mountain. But then you look over and there's that other mountain to climb, and you start climbing that one. So it's a fun thing. One thing I always loved about real estate and brands and building like Shipyard and getting involved with other brands like Ice Pick is you're creating something that'll have a life of its own, and it'll build and go. And what where the stress comes in is you often spend more money than you think. You often borrow more money than you anticipated. And that stress of owing money and having to make payroll and not figuring out how to make payroll, and it's tough. And being in a seasonal business like we are in Maine, you have feast and famine. The January, February, March, April, you'll lose a great deal of money, and then coming into summer, hopefully everything goes right and you make your money back. And so you never feel as strong and as energetic that you're going to kick butt and make some money in the spring as you do in July, August, September, when you're having busy times, hopefully.